Well, now I would like to welcome our special guest to the chair. Our special guest for this evening, Carol Limmer. We'll both just get comfortable here. I'm channeling my Sarah Kanowski for this conversation. So if you don't already know Carol Limmer, then it's probably because this is your first time at any Pyrmont meeting. Carol is a real Pyrmont identity. She has been a big part of Pyrmont History Group for many years, loved for her generous service of the highest quality drink and canapes at the end of each meeting, mostly at her own expense and with a minimum of fuss. But tonight, Carol, this is your night when you don't have to do the food and the drink serving. In fact, Peter and I have swapped roles for this evening, so he and Fran are in the kitchen working and preparing the post-talk treats. Carol has been pivotal in making Pyrmont such a unique community, with her long commitments to the Jackson's Landing Community Association, the Pyrmont Community Centre, Pyrmont Action, Pyrmont Supports, and Christmas in Pyrmont, among other things. Then there's also her awesome reputation as Pyrmont's pub quiz champ. But beneath this familiarity, there is a story of a very successful woman, dedicated to helping other women become appreciated and successful. Carol naturally doesn't like talking about herself, and we certainly don't want to embarrass her, but her story is worth sharing as it shines the light on some of the history of our fortunate post-World War II Australian life, and in particular the rise of women in the workplace and community, not only in numbers but in leadership roles. And it's certainly a worthy topic for International Women's Day, which, as you know, was on the 8th of March. So some preliminary facts about Carol. Listen carefully, because they could end up being questions in one of her pub quizzes. In 1965, Carol was a dollar Jill who travelled the country to convince us to give up our pounds, shillings and pence. After working for the Commonwealth Bank, the biggest financial institution in Australia, for 46 years, she retired as one of the highest ranking female senior executives and the second longest serving employee in the bank. She was pivotal in writing one of the first sexual harassment policies in Australia. As our faithful Pyrmont History Group caterer, she's overqualified for that job. She can sign her professional letters with FAICD, that's Fellow of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, FGIA, or Fellow of the Governance Institute of Australia, FIML, Fellow of the Australian Institute of Managers and Leaders, and CHAHRI, the Chartered Member of Australian Human Resources Institute. In fact, Carol has personally played a fascinating role in the history of social and commercial change in Australia over the last 70 years. So thanks, Carol, for agreeing to have this conversation. So, Carol, where did it all begin?
Well, I was born in Bondi during the latter part of the war, so I am a Bondi girl.
On the original, an early Bondi girl. Your father, Laurie, went away during the war. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, Dad had 6 years away in World War II, first in Northern Africa. He was at Tobruk, he was one of the rats at Tobruk. He was at El Alamein, Syria, Libya, Palestine, lots of countries over in that area. And then he was brought back in the defence of Australia in 1942, when he subsequently served in New Guinea and in Borneo.
Right. Well, we've got a couple of generic photos up here of Australians in North Africa and New Guinea. What did your father do after the war, Carol?
Well, he did actually stay in the Army Reserves after the war and rose to the rank of captain.
So if we have a look at the next slide, we've got young Laurie getting a trophy on the left, and training in this post-war period. And that's Laurie Osborne is the one standing in the photo on the right. Your father sounded like an amazingly self-taught man. Was he a big influence on you?
Yes, Mary, he didn't have much schooling. He actually finished at 6th class in primary school, because that was the years of the Depression in Australia. But he was the dux of his school, and then he worked in clerical jobs before the war. After the war, he bought a corner store and was also a hardware store manager, and then much later bought a post office on the Gold Coast. He had, you could say, considerable entrepreneurial and management flair, and that's despite his, lack of formal education. And I have to say he was a big positive influence in my life, a great role model, really. Oops.
Now, Peter has sourced on the internet and found a typical hardware store on the left there, just after the war and before the rise of Bunnings. It also shows on the right Qantas at Rose Bay. Now, your mother had a Rose Bay connection, so tell us about that.
Yes, Mary. My mum worked as a secretary to the High Court judges, and then she was based at Rose Bay, working at Qantas, where they flew international Catalinas. Rose Bay was established as Australia's first international airport in 1936, the airport they were taking off from the water. My mum was attached to the RAF during the war when the RAF took over that area for the Catalinas. And she also worked in the Army Auxiliary before and after the war. And she actually wrote poetry, and I used to love listening to that. After the war, she had my brother and sister. I was the oldest sibling.
Well, I hope you kept some of her poems. Wow. So besides your parents' hard work and ingenuity, your family also had some luck. So what was that, Carol?
Yes, just after the war, my parents shared in a big lottery win, and their share was in fact big enough to finance a house and a car in those days. So that was a great start.
All right, once again we see the lottery win, the Australian dream. It was always the great hope of most Australian families, and the Opera House lottery that started in 1958 was the biggest dream. And I'm sure a lot of you remember that parents often, and my parents, they'd buy a lottery ticket every week, and you'd be searching through the list of numbers in the Daily Telegraph to see if you were a winner. So your childhood, was it entirely in Sydney, Carol?
Yes, but we did move around a lot with my dad's work. My early life and schooling in Belmore, Bankstown, Oatley and Linfield. I had a wonderful childhood, and there were plenty of opportunities. From an early age, my parents encouraged me to take on responsibilities. So aside from looking after my siblings, I started childminding from the age of 11 for neighbours. And would you believe, at the age of 12, I was even entrusted with the care of a newborn child, so I could change nappies, etc. And they would trust me to take the kids on outings to Luna Park and the zoo, etc. So I guess childminding was my first introduction to business, and it was lucrative in a money sense as well.
Oh, so it was lucrative. And then you decided to get a professional qualification, is that right?
Well, sort of. I decided I'd do a childcare course in Red Cross, and as a Red Cross member, and at that stage, I was in high school, I did voluntary work at a Red Cross children's home. After finishing school, the Red Cross voluntary aid detachment that I belonged to had me going around hospital wards, meeting war vets and doing voluntary work at the blood bank. And I've remained a Red Cross member and volunteered and served on an Australian Red Cross Board Committee. For 14 years I did that before stepping down 2 years ago. And I've got to say I'm very proud of my Distinguished Service Medal that was awarded by the Red Cross. But I just went to a conference 2 weeks ago, so I'm still up there with Red Cross.
Oh, well done. So what happened when you got to high school?
Yep. Initially I went to St George Girls High School, which was a selective school in high school in Cogra, and then I was able to transfer to Hornsby Girls High when we moved to Linfield. That was also a selective school. And not only were these schools great for accelerated academic development, but they had very good sports programs as well. I learnt to play golf, squash, hockey, and a range of other sporting activities. I played hockey for the school and for an adult team outside of school.
A very full life at school. So you finished the Leaving Certificate with good results, but you decided to join the Commonwealth Bank rather than go to university.
Yeah.
Why was that?
Well, after I finished my exams and while I waited for the results, I decided to get a job before Christmas. More money I was interested in. I had a Commonwealth Bank account, one of those little passbook accounts, so I fronted the CBA and inquired about work before Christmas. They gave me a job and I really liked it. I liked the responsibility and I guess the money as well. So despite my school results that could have taken me to university, I decided to stay working with the bank. They assured me I would be able to do my tertiary studies part-time while working. Not long afterwards, I found myself training other new employees and given more responsibility. The bank did support my tertiary studies in business at TAFE and then at university, and with many development programs and courses over the years. In fact, once when I was travelling to the US, I made inquiries about anything that I could do while I was over there, and they enrolled me at the Michigan State University for a week-long course, which was nice. And then another time I was going to London, and I was able to go to a remuneration conference at one of their fancy hotels, like the Ritz-Carlton, I think it was.
Wow. Now, the bank seemed to recognise your abilities and talents fairly quickly. So what happened in 1965, Catherine?
Well, in 1965, I was seconded to the Decimal Currency Board to work in the introduction of decimal currency in 1966. Interestingly, the idea of Australia changing to decimal currency was first mooted in 1902. It was revisited in 1937 when a Royal Commission recommended Australia going decimal. But it wasn't until the 1950s that the decimal currency movement started to really gain momentum. In 1958, Sir Robert Menzies included decimalisation of Australia's currency system in his re-election platform. Research showed that the £30 million cost of converting to decimal would soon be offset by an estimated £11 million annual saving to the Australian economy. Harold Holt, who was then Treasurer, announced in April 1963 that the earliest practicable date for the changeover was February 1966.
Right, so there's Carol on the Decimal Currency Board. So what was the public's reaction to the change, Carol? Did you have protests saying, save our pound?
Not really, no. Most people were supportive and could see the value of a simpler system. Most of the angst went into whether it would make us too American. The government had a competition for the naming of the new currency. Oster was the name suggested by Holt, but there were plenty of other suggestions. Magpie, Noodle, Pacific, Tasma, Anzac, Brumby, Melba, Koala, Kanga, Roo, Emu, and Merino. In June 1963, Menzies, who was ever the monarchist, rejected all the entrance suggestions in favour of the Royal. This did meet with widespread disapproval, and eventually Holt conceded it would actually be called the dollar.
Well, thank God we were saved from the Royal and the Roo.
So it was a massive logical exercise with 600 million coins and 150 million banknotes having to be minted and printed. Australia created the new national mint at Canberra by the end of 1964 to do the job. There was a fear at the time that the change could be actually inflationary.
Well then, what was your role in this change to decimal currency then, Carol?
Well, before the actual changeover took place, the board mounted an intensive publicity campaign to inform the community what will happen and what was required of members of the public. I was appointed as one of the $4 Jills. We all wore different coloured dresses representing the new currency. Rust red for $20 and £10 notes, blue for $10 and £5 notes, and green for the $2 and £1 notes, and brown for the $1 and 10 shilling note. I wore green. They decided I had red hair and green was my colour. We appeared at the Royal Easter Show and then at a range of other events. And then 2 of us were selected to travel all around Australia to carry on the education program.
Oh, what a shame we haven't got that in colour, eh?
Yeah.
So you flew around the country as Dollar Jill. Was that a big PR process then, Carol?
Yeah, there was. When we flew to the other states, all the other passengers would disembark from the plane first. I changed into my decimal dress and then walked down the exit stairs to be met by a gaggle of press and TV cameras. It was great. I would retire to the hotel of an evening to see myself on TV. We did other interviews, radio and TV. I was on Four Corners and I was in the Australian Women's Weekly as well.
Oh, did all this exposure feel overwhelming for you?
Well, surprisingly, I didn't feel overwhelmed, but in hindsight, I'm amazed that I did handle the public speaking well, and I guess it was just the confidence of youth at the time, and it was fun.
You had all that experience from babies and up, so you're pretty good with all ages. So what was your biggest personal learning from all that?
In the end, it was a great success, and it proved to a lot of people that women can do roles that had traditionally been held by men. At that stage, all bank tellers were men. Most of the public relations was done by men. So Dollar Jill role really proved that women can be just as effective and successful. It was a great boost for my Commonwealth banking career, and not long afterwards, the bank actually introduced a women's advanced appointment scheme to develop women's roles. But initially that was mainly populated by older women, but I was lucky to be one of the younger ones. It led to a wonderful career in many areas of banking and finance, including human resources, retail banking, time and methods, mergers and acquisitions and change management.
Now, the Commonwealth Bank is Australia's largest financial company. Can you give us a quick history of the bank while you were there from 1961 to 2007? And I'll just put a slide up to help with that.
Right. In 1960, the Reserve Bank of Australia was established, and the Commonwealth Banking Corporation, as it was called, was then commissioned to provide trading, savings and development banking, which was separate from its previous Reserve Bank functions. In 1974, the first credit card was introduced, called the bank card. In 1975, there was equal pay for female employees. In 1984, the bank was renamed Commonwealth Bank of Australia. EFTPOS was introduced in 1991, and the privatisation of the Commonwealth Bank of Australia commenced in 1991 and was completed in 1996.
So you were working in Australia's largest financial institution at a time when major changes were happening. Can you tell us who were the key players then?
Yeah, well, I guess Paul Keating was a significant force beyond banking and economic reform. The Australian dollar was floated in 1983, which was a gutsy but ultimately a strong innovation for the reform of the Australian economy. It incentivised companies to be more strategic and more competitive in their future business plans. Hawke and Keating, long-serving Labor men, were encouraging that.
So this slide shows Paul Keating announcing the floating of the Australian dollar. It also shows a picture of Don Sanders, who was appointed the CEO of the Commonwealth Bank in 1987. So Carol, why was Don Sanders special?
Right, well, Don Sanders was the first outsider actually to be appointed CEO since CBA's first governor, Denison Miller, who was in the 1920s. Don was working for the Reserve Bank at the time, and his knowledge of the banking system as a whole was a great asset and a source of confidence. He believed CBA should be more competitive and commercial in line with the Hawke government's objectives. It was time for an outsider to come in and shake up the bank.
But he wasn't a total stranger to the bank. In fact, his bank origins are very similar to yours. So how was that?
Well, that's right. He joined the Commonwealth Bank in Wollongong in 1943 as a 16-year-old teenager, served at the Enmore and, would you believe, Pyrmont branches between 1946 and 1948. In 1946, he enrolled part-time in economics at Sydney University, graduated in 1950 and worked on central banking work. He spent time with the Treasury in Canberra, London School of Economics and the Bank of England in the UK. In 1960, all Reserve Bank work was taken over by the new Reserve Bank of Australia, and so Don became a Reserve Bank employee, only to return 27 years later as Managing Director and CEO of the Commonwealth Banking Corporation.
And so what sort of things did Don do?
Well, Don was actually very much focused on staff performance and engagement. He set up personal development schemes with consistent measures of performance. He introduced an internal appeals system to investigate complaints by dissatisfied customers. All staff became eligible for bonuses for very good performance. Until that point, the only possible bonus, let's say, came through promotion. When Don died in 2020 at the age of 93, he was broadly acclaimed as a great figure in Australian banking. The former PM, Paul Keating, said at his funeral, Don was fundamentally a great public servant. He was a very important figure. He was central in the transformation of Australia from a closed economy to an open economy. Rob Ferguson, who was the former head of Bankers Trust, went further to nominate Don Sanders as the most distinguished banker in Australia's history.
And you were there at the time too. So what was your role in the bank at this time, Carol?
Well, I had many jobs. In fact, I had 40 different jobs in my 46 years. Maybe they could never find one I could do. At one stage, I became the first equal opportunity affirmative action executive in the bank. They gave me an office and a filing cabinet and a rather vaguely defined job. I ran focus groups throughout the bank to define the issues. This led to my first initiative, which was a company-wide campaign addressing sexual harassment amongst the 42,000 employees.
Oh, this was the first of the Me Too movement then, happening then. So how did senior management and the board react to that unexpected initiative?
Well, I guess I have to admit my proposal was met with some disbelief. One of the business unit heads responded by saying, but the Commonwealth Bank doesn't have any sexual harassment in its workplace, and hence my initiative was not needed. After some silence, I was a bit dumbfounded what to say. Luckily, this comment was met by another male senior executive, saying that this was not his experience and that he was constantly counselling men to keep their hands to themselves. The CEO then gave me the go-ahead for a brochure to be sent throughout the bank. So I was on my way.
Now this graph shows, clearly shows that these were times of great change for both women in numbers and positions. So this chart tries to show how dramatic the change was. So when you were Dollar Jill, women aged between 25 and 55. So we've got the age along the bottom and the percentage along the side, and the bottom line is 1966, and then we go 1980, 2000 and 2020. So when you were Dollar Jill, women aged between 25 to 55, only 40% were employed. But when you were CBA senior manager, 65% were employed. Did you feel that change, and what else were its new needs?
Yeah, one of the big needs was maternity leave provisions and the retention of permanent jobs. Up until then, when women left, they came back really as temporary assistants. And then job sharing and the treatment of employees with disabilities was important. We had people working with hearing impediments in data entry. I felt particularly engaged with the issue of disability and decided to go to Tech to learn sign language at my own expense and in my own time. And this was one of the examples of my job challenges motivating me to develop appropriate skills. I always enjoyed learning right from my childhood, and it was a natural part of, I guess, my 46 years in the Commonwealth Bank.
So during this time, did you receive support from peer managers?
Yes, many were helpful. I did get particular help from David Murray, who you would have all heard about, who was the head of strategy at the time and during the sexual harassment process. The strategy group became an important driver of policy and direction in the bank under Don Sanders. They focused on the strengths and weaknesses within the bank and scanned the business environment for the threats and the many opportunities in that time of significant change. Human resources, work culture and employee engagement were seen as important levers in the bank's future development and prosperity. And there was an increasing awareness about the role and leverage of women in the workplace. I guess I was lucky again, really, to be in the right place at the right time.
And then what happened to David Murray?
Well, in 1992, David followed Don Sanders as the new CEO, and he held that position until 2005. During his tenure, Commonwealth Bank transformed from a partly privatised bank following the takeover of the State Bank of Victoria and then later the Colonial First State. So the privatisation started in 1991 with a market capitalisation of $6 billion in 1992 and to $49 million as an integrated financial services company by 2005. So they were pretty exciting times, really.
And this slide shows the major privatisations in the 90s, with the Commonwealth Bank raising $8 billion. So what was your role, Carol, in the privatisation process?
Well, CBA was the first major privatisation in a series of public asset sales that included Qantas and Telstra, which combined with the launch of compulsory superannuation have helped really create a strong mum and dad share owning culture. The bank used this sale of bank shares as an opportunity to encourage employee share ownership and engagement with the bank's enterprise. My job included design of a program to encourage share ownership. We offered the first shares to employees. They could get their first 500 shares at a 10% discount to the market price, and that facilitated incentive payments to be made in shares. So my first Commonwealth Bank shares, my first 500, cost me $4.70. They're now about $20,000, yeah.
So why do you think the Commonwealth Bank was the most successful of the big four banks?
Yeah, well, the bank's always seen technology as an important opportunity for its growth. This partly flowed from the strategy group, but it was a long-standing insight, you could say. The Commonwealth Bank installed its first mainframe computer, the IBM System 360 Model 30, to process staff payroll in April 1966, which was just after decimal currency was introduced. CBA's technology leadership continues today, having been awarded by CanStar the best digital bank for 13 years in a row. I monitor some companies on behalf of members of the Australian Shareholders Association, and as part of that, I don't monitor the Commonwealth Bank for various reasons, but I do monitor Westpac, and Westpac at the moment is just putting a lot of money into technology to try and catch up.
Finally.
Finally.
So Carol, you retired. I hate using that word. You retired, for want of a better one, from the Commonwealth Bank in 2007. So what was your role at that time?
Yeah. Well, I don't know where I have retired. I retired from full-time paid employment. I was proudly a senior executive then as the head of performance, recognition and remuneration. That took in all the remuneration schemes across the bank, incentive programs, employee share option plans, staff superannuation. It was a great job, and I had about 150 employees in my team.
Well, you obviously didn't go home and put your slippers on, stay there. So what happened then?
Well, I guess I was lucky. I was invited to work on a number of boards and committees One of the first was with the Australian Shareholders Association from 2007, and the Frank Whitten Group, which is an aged care organisation, from 2008. I spent about 15 years with both of them, and I'm still on with the ASA, Australian Shareholders. The Whitten Group was about ensuring older Australians receive the high quality care, and was entrusted to care for over 2,500 senior Australians, and was responsible for the health and safety of nearly 3,000 employees. So yeah, it's a great organisation, I've got to say.
And then what else? There was even more learning, I believe.
Yeah, well, the aged care industry is being shaped by the advice and insights of the Royal Commission into aged care quality. There were many new learning challenges. COVID, of course, made it even more challenging. And our company was one of the first to introduce what they call RAT tests and PCR tests for employees when they were coming on duty. We actually got a letter jointly signed by the New South Wales Health Minister and Minister for Ageing, saying what a wonderful job we have done on that. Whitten's also doing interesting work in the treatment of dementia, of course. And one program they have for residents is the raising of chickens, chooks. They collect the eggs and they cook them. Some of the residents even grow green vegetables for the chooks. We had Costa, who you might know, he's a bit of a culture person, from the ABC come and get involved. So they were on the TV program and also in the ABC magazine.
Right. Did you get to meet Costa?
Yep.
Oh. Right.
He was very impressed, actually.
I'm sure. So, the Australian Shareholders Association, it seems like it was a good fit for your skills and experience. Can you tell us about that, Carol?
Yes, the Australian Shareholders Association, called ASA, is the voice of retail investors. Our CEO is Rachel Waterhouse, and we have over 5,000 members. That's growing because we recently amalgamated with the Australian Investors Association, and we have a mission to both educate and advocate for retail investors. ASA monitors, they monitor the performance of various ASX 200 companies. This involves analysing company media releases, attending company briefings, reading annual reports, meeting personally with the board chairs, but in the ASA we are not permitted to actually give financial advice. I mean, people are always after us to give tips. I've been a company monitor for a range of companies, but in more recent times, Star Entertainment, Westpac and Aristocrat, who do the gaming machines.
Oh, so you keep an eye on our local Star.
Yeah, well, I was, yeah.
And but I guess through your Pyrmont activities in 2016, you got back into banking. So
Yes.
how was that?
Well, I joined the board of the local community Bendigo Bank, which is owned by City West Financial Services, and they now operate very successfully in Darling Square. I stepped down from the board, but I remain a board advisor there, so I do attend all the board meetings. So yes, Mary, it was great to get back into banking, particularly this community bank that put so much back into the community. 80% of their profits go into the community.
If you think that's not enough, wait, there's more. One of your most enduring board memberships has been with Zonta, joining Zonta in 2000. So, for people like me who didn't know until I spoke to you about it, what is Zonta and how important is Zonta?
Yeah. Well, Zonta is actually an international organisation that's in countries all around the world, and it started in the US, and the word Zonta comes from one of the Native American languages, and it means honest and trustworthy. I have had a long interest in the empowerment of women. I note with pride that Australia was the first country, it was actually South Australia, to both give women the vote and then Australia to also give the right to stand for Parliament in 1902. Zonta International was formed in the 1920s. One of the well-known people was Amelia Earhart, because a lot of you would have heard of her as being an aviator who was unfortunately lost, and they hadn't found her. Its motto is to empower women, this is Zonta, through service and advocacy. In a practical sense, we supply breast care cushions to women who have had mastectomies. We help women rehabilitate after prison by belonging to a coalition of organisations helping to keep women out of prison. In that coalition, there's a whole range of organisations like Sir Optimus, Country Women's, Shine for Kids, who help support the kids whose parents are in prison, Dress for Success, a whole lot of different countries. We advocate that women are better rehabilitated outside the justice system, as most are on short-term sentences. Nearly all of them come from low socio-economic backgrounds, and a lot of them have been subject to abuse as children or domestic violence, etc. So we provide useful backpacks for those coming out of prison, which include toiletries and an Opal card. One of my friends here actually helps provide some of those. We also raise awareness and elimination of violence against women. And we do get great support from people like our local parliamentarian, Alex Greenwich.
Sounds like we should all be supporting Zonta. Now, with this busy life that you've had from being 11 years old and already with your lucrative babysitting business, you'd think there's been no time for any love, but somewhere along the way, you met someone and fell in love. So your wedding was at the Garrison Church over 50 years ago to Paul Limmer.
Yep, that's
so,
right.
So how did you decide to live in Pyrmont then, Carol?
Well, I guess like many post-war long-term residents, we were loyally rewarded by the growth in Sydney's estate market, the real estate market. Paul and I lived briefly in Birchgrove and then bought our first home at Camperdown, doing all the renovations ourselves. 9 years later, we moved to Killara and also had the opportunity to buy an investment property in Mosman. Then we purchased a 90-acre hobby farm on the mid-north coast, which we had for 12 years, and we had a number of steers on that. I hadn't really fancied myself as a country girl, having been born at Bondi, but I think I still am a city girl. We eventually sold the farm to my brother and his partner. The house in Killara was sold, and we moved to Pyrmont in 2012, and this was the best move we'd ever made.
Right, now, getting towards the end there and thinking, there are areas in the world that are called blue zones. You may have heard this. It refers to places where people live the longest, and it was found that various lifestyles are closely linked to health, happiness and longevity. Carol, what is it about Pyrmont that you like doing? And do you think Pyrmont is a blue zone?
I definitely do. In Pyrmont, as we mentioned earlier, I've been with Jackson's Landing Community Association since 2015. I very happily belong to Friends of the Pyrmont Community Centre, Pyrmont Supports, Pyrmont History Group, and of course Christmas in Pyrmont. I also regularly attend monthly community dinners. We've had so many wonderful, caring friends in Pyrmont. It's so lovely to walk out in the streets and recognise so many smiling faces. Before we came to live in Pyrmont, we had two separate experiences here. One was we inspected a terrace house in Harris Street many years ago and nearly bought it. The other was a serious accident in 1972 on the corner of Harris and Miller Streets. Paul's grandmother died in that accident. His mother was hospitalised for 6 weeks, and Paul had a week in hospital. They didn't put me in, I was too strong. I was deeply impressed by the kindness of the bystanders, and still am today. At that accident, people in their houses came out with blankets, and there was one person who had had medical background and was able to do CPR. The accident was not Paul's fault, it was the other person who'd gone through a red light. I've got to say, Mary, I aspire to live out my day in Pyrmont's Blue Zone, healthy, active and loved by friends and family.
Well, in conclusion, I thought Carol just said she wants to live here healthy and active. And I said to Carol, that's all these things that you do, what do you do to keep fit? And found that she plays Scrabble on Mondays, organises the pub quiz on Monday nights, she does Pilates 3 times a week, Tai Chi 3 times a week, the occasional tennis game, and she's also in a book club. So Carol, you're an inspiration to us all, and we thank you so much for having this conversation.
Thank you so much, Mary.
I don't know whether anyone has any questions for Carol.
Thanks, Jill. Carol, my question relates to that. I just wondered, when you travelled, did Dollar Bill go too?
Yes, I travelled with Dollar Bill. I got to know him very well. You probably, if you remember those days, he was an animated character, but there was an actor who stood behind him. So, yes, I got to know him very well. And I got to know the song very well too.
I still remember.
I'm not a very good singer. I'd have to get one of the people in the choir, like you, Mary, to sing it.
All right, add it to our repertoire. A pretty comprehensive talk, and giving us a history of not just Carol's life, but her involvement in the Commonwealth Bank and the change in Australia. As I said at the beginning, the changes that occurred, we've certainly been our generation who have lived in the lucky times post World War II, and we're very grateful for that.